The Federation of Old Cornish Societies has been really supportive of regional carol singing across Cornwall over the years, and particularly bringing them in to perform at the cathedral. So we wanted to do a carol project on the Roseland as well. So again, the lead partners were these three, but perhaps with the Old Cornwall taking more of a lead on this occasion. Of course, with the Heritage Centre providing the anchor and funding, following the same sort of methodology as the last one in terms of where we got the material from.
Yeah, we were lucky to find all sorts of carols. I know that Camborne and Redruth have a kind of a cornerstone of the Cornish caroling tradition, but they are all over Cornwall. And one of the lovely things that we were able to do was look at this 1927 publication by Ben Barnicoat, who had collected manuscripts that had belonged to his great-grandfather. And a lot of this is covered in a little video that we've got later on. But the main thing that came out of this one was, is Tregony in the Roseland? Nev says no to someone from the North Coast. I would say yes, but it's not, is it? No, it's not. But as a gateway to the Roseland, and because this publication hadn't been printed for almost a century, we included them. There are also several in the Cornish Songbook that had included manuscripts of W.C. Dunstan, who at that point was secretary of the London Cornish Association, and they were his grandfather's manuscripts from Portlow. Here's an example that we used later on in the project. So we had musical sources, music books, but Nev also did some great newspaper research.
Yeah, so we just using the National Newspaper Archive, we found accounts of carol services in the Roseland, and we're able to list to find some of the carols from those sources as well. And that was one of them. This there, Mary Carol, was one that was sung, I think, in 1902 at Gerrans and at Philly.
Yeah, it was lovely to imagine and uncover some of these carols that probably aren't heard so often anymore. One that definitely hadn't been heard for a very long time is this next item, which again we'll talk about a bit later. But this was a fascinating example of a piece that had been sung in Portlow village, but had dropped out of use completely, and until we came across it with Christine Edwards in Verrian and collaborated with her friend Joyce Gilbert, we were able to reconstruct it with the help of Peter Meanwell, who is director of the Washaway Gallery Choir, and has been a huge help, another collaborator in this project.
One of the things we found was that when they wrote it down, they didn't necessarily put the right words under the right notes. So when you moved them along a bit, it worked a bit better.
Yes, that is what happened. So the second memory day that we had also pulled out a lot of shared memories of carols on the Roseland. We had somebody come and mention carol tours that they remember doing. It's not something that happens ever so wide in a widespread way so much anymore, but going and visiting houses and singing carols at Christmas was much more widespread, and so it was lovely to hear stories of that. And there were other carols and other sources identified as thanks to her as well.
Yeah, one of them was her story. And we found this person who I hadn't heard of before, Florence Gertrude Stodden ní Asinbra. She also went under the nom de plume of Christabel. But she was, in the beginning of the 20th century, she became a professional lyricist. And what she was doing was writing the words for music and then publishing them in books or in newspapers and inviting musicians to come forward and put the music to them. Which they did, and there are scores of her works in the various libraries. And her father was one time minister at Porthscatho. She married a Cornishman, and although they lived up in England, they did return in the Second World War and lived in Porthscatho, and she's buried in the churchyard of Porthscatho. This was one of the poems that she wrote and published that we don't think was ever put to music.
Yeah, that's lovely. An Easter carol. They're not all Christmas carols. Our next item that we got up there is our Cornish language item, which was lovely to have. So the St Day Carol came to us through a woman called Yvonne Fuller, who was a professional opera singer who had relocated to St Mawes. And in the 70s, she had been involved in a church service that was aiming to have carols in as many languages as they could find. And she wrote to her aunt, who was at that point in Porthscatho, and Polperro. Apologies, Polperro. So she wrote to the aunt in Polperro, who got in touch with somebody who could speak Cornish and sent her not only a written lyrics of St Day Carol in Cornish, but also a recording from the 70s of the St Day Carol in Cornish. So that was lovely. So she performed it in this church service in 1973, and then when she came back down to Cornwall, she set up a group called the St Mawes Waits, which sing carols at the Tresanton Hotel every Christmas Eve, and they sing a Cornish language carol at the Tresanton every Christmas Eve.
So we found over 40 carols with connections to the Roseland, and we found one with connected to every parish except Ruin-Lanihorn.
Which we did remedy in the end.
Yeah. One thing that's worth mentioning is our approach to funding is that we went out, or I went out and spoke to each of these councils and told them all about the project, and got little bits of money off of all of them. Because what we deliberately wanted to do was to include these communities in our collaboration. It wasn't just a matter of getting the money off them. We wanted to make sure that they were fully engaged, and we really succeeded in that.
Yeah, they were incredibly supportive, all of them. And we also had a kind of unexpected extra bit of support from the University of Sheffield, who are running a project called Access Folk, which is run in their music department, finding out how and why people might experience barriers to getting involved in folk music and particularly singing. And so this project seemed to fit in really well with them, and we were lucky enough to get support from them. And they were interested in how we were going to engage our communities with the idea of singing these carols, which I realise we haven't said is the part of the point of the project, was not just to find them, but to get them sung. So they were hugely helpful throughout.
So we moved on to the activity phase of the project. Again, there was an exhibition at the Heritage Centre which included the carols. And then one of the things that we did is we got the local historians down at Ruin-Lanihorn to give us some information on their history and their local place names. And then we gave that to Gareth Churcher, who remedied the Ruin-Lanihorn situation by composing a brand new carol for Ruin-Lanihorn.
Just as an aside, Sheffield's funding couldn't be used for religious purposes, and so we wrote it in that the new carol must actually be secular, which makes it quite an unusual kind of an unusual one in the collection. But I think it was actually really worthwhile because it tells a little bit of the story of the unknown places in Ruin-Lanihorn, doesn't it? And then a big part of the project was writing a carol book. So our collection of 40 carols, we sent over to Peter Meanwell, our incredibly patient transcriber, who put all of these different sources, some of them, handwritten or needing reconstruction or different printers, and we wanted them all to look and be easily readable and usable by people in a new carol book. I wrote short commentaries on the history of each one as far as we could find it, because I was by no means alone in doing the research on this. Peter was a huge help, as was Christine Edwards, who gave a lot of help in the proofreading and wrote a lovely foreword for us. It was published by the Federation of Old Cornish Societies, and it was launched at the Truro Cathedral Carol Service. That was the Carols of the Roseland service. Another important thing that we did with the funding was to make sure that this carol book was given freely to schools and libraries, not just in the Roseland, but across Cornwall, so that these carols are now back in circulation, hopefully for people to pick up in future. And it is still available on the Federation website shop.
So we had to move on to teaching the carols to people. New choirs were formed. Music director put in place, Pam Carbis, and Pam's with us today. Thank you, Pam. And a whole host of rehearsals, and they had to learn 4 new carols. And there are the motley crew at the first rehearsal. And there's There's Pam. Is that a good picture of you, Pam?
No, honestly, without Pam, this phase of the project would not have happened, because we desperately needed a musical director who would be able to marshal these groups, and Pam was the woman for the job.
So we also put together a children's choir to sing the Roseland Carol, and we had the help of Kay Robinson, who leads the Phillies singing group. And I think we've got another little video to show the children singing that song.
This quiet place has stories to tell. St Gerrans came here with such church and well. It once was busy with people and trade, as journeys from London to Penzance were made. Lally ho, lally ho, lad gate, money's up, money's up.
That was very sweet. And those are names that don't really appear on maps, do they? Those are local names. Yeah, they're lovely.
So to get the, we had to get different choirs to learn different numbers of carols, and we included Amici Bocci, the Roseland Church's choir, and St Anthony Noise as the band.
Yeah, that
and
was marvellous.
there's Emma again. She also leads the St Anthony Noise, so she was well involved in the project.
Yeah, so that was fantastic.
So Just Feast invited us to come down and give us a talk and sing some of the songs, and they gave us their collection that day towards the project.
That was really kind.
So that was the final rehearsal with everybody together.
And it was absolutely necessary to have this rehearsal, because the Federation has put on carol services at the cathedral before, but nothing as sort of complicated or ambitious as this one, with different groups combining to sing different carols, and a children's group and a band. So this last rehearsal was so needed to bring it all together. And the 4th of December itself was a really triumphant evening. We had a lot of support from Truro Old Cornish Society and Bert Biscoe, who were always so helpful with these. We launched the book, which we're really happy sold really well. I hope people are enjoying those throughout the year. And so the carol service, we had the 9 carols and Lingham. And one thing that Nev was really keen to make sure happened in the service was that there was a carol from each parish, so that all of the communities who had supported us throughout the project saw themselves represented in the service itself. And we also had 4 short talks. I mean, you've got your kind of bracket of carols, and then we had 4 people speaking. So Nev and I introduced the project a little bit and spoke about carolling in Cornwall and how it's a big part of Cornwall's musical culture. But we had a story from Christine Edwards, who wrote our foreword about carolling with her great aunts and how her memories had come into the project and given us some material to put in. We had Father Doug Robbins and Trounce Guy, who gave a dialect poem that was fantastic. Another important part of the service that Chris Trevina, who hasn't had a mention yet, but he is out there, helped us with was live streaming it. So even though it was a late night shopping night and half of Truro's car parks were closed, it was wonderful to be able to make sure that not only was it recorded, but it was also available for people to listen at home at the time, and then, whenever else as well. So we've got a lovely record of the whole evening, which was just a joy.
One of the unintended consequences of getting so many choirs involved is, of course, that having persuaded them to learn the new carols and put them in their repertoire, they all used them in their rehearsals and performances in the lead up to Christmas. And when I put them on a spreadsheet, there were over 70 events that included our carols last year, which I was blown away by. But it kind of happened by accident, but a great accident nonetheless. And we should be able to show you another video now to show you a little bit about what we're talking about, the carols themselves.
So I know that some of that doesn't sound like folk music, but it very much is community music and would have been. And we're so pleased that the legacy of this project has been to capture it and be able to make it available again for people to use and celebrate it through in this way this last winter. We've got material that's going to be included in the upcoming Old Cornwall Spring Journal. We've got all the recordings that are available on the Federation's YouTube. We've had new discoveries. We've been fortunate enough to be able to commission new compositions, and Nev is already talking to people about Roseland Carols for this year.
I am. And also we mentioned the Easter Carol that Florence Attenborough had done the words for. We've already got 2 people to put 2 musical settings to that, so we now have a new Easter Carol. And of course, as soon as you publish a book and you think you've gathered all the carols, somebody says, "Oh, did you know about this other one from Portlow?" so we've got another one from Portlow to add into our next publication. We want to do some of these in Cornish and add to the Canute YouTube channel. And that's something I'm working on. I've just commissioned a translation from the translation service of First Noel, and hopefully we can get that done in the next 12 months. And there's some of the collaborators, Kate.
Yeah, that's our group of us, a triumphant photo on the night. So Nev, Pam, Clive Brown, Kay Robinson. In the middle is Rebecca Drazy-Collishaw from the University of Sheffield, who came down to see what we'd been up to. Emma, Alison, Bert, Alan, Bashforth and me. But that is just a small group compared to this massive list of people and organisations who supported us all the way through the Roseland Carol Project. It was extraordinary to be able to bring a lot of different people together. It was focused on the Roseland and had a lot of community support, but as you were saying, there were other people from outside the Roseland who saw the value of it, and we're really pleased with how it's all gone. The innovation side of it, which we're really delighted to be nominated for as well, is that we feel that we've innovated in a few ways, reconstructing carols that were lost or that we weren't sure about how they were originally sung. We had the new composition in Ruan Lanahorn. Putting together 2 new carol choirs is nothing to be sniffed at. The idea is aiming to put these carols back in the community so that in future years there can be material and enthusiasm and confidence on the Roseland to bring a caroling tradition in that flourishes on its own, not without having to have a project behind it or even pushing it along. And bringing those two new choirs into the multiple choir group that we put together for the service the Royal We, Pam, put together for the service was fantastic. We've talked about the community engagement, and I thought that going around to all the parishes to ensure that communities felt approached and represented in the project was really good. And bringing these different archive and museum pieces to life and having them reinterpreted in some cases has been a wonderful experience as well. So I know we've raced through that, and we've actually got 2 minutes before 3:15.
One last video.
Oh, I've got one last video, sorry. Yeah, one last video.
Arise and hail the glorious star, which brought the
feel honour bound to say I did not have any input into the production of the videos. And as hopefully we've put across to you, it's not just me and it's not just Pam, it's been everybody that we were involved with over the last 2 years that we've been working on this.
It's been a tremendous amount of hard work. And we're really grateful to all of the people that worked with us to achieve what we achieved. But I hope that what we've put across to you is that we had a fantastic amount of fun with this project, and it is going to continue into the future as well. So thank you very much for listening.